The Texas heat was suffocating that August morning as I sat in the Harris County Family Court, my shirt already damp with sweat despite the air conditioning. Outside, Houston's skyline shimmered through the courthouse windows like a mirage, but inside, my world was crumbling piece by piece. "Mr. Thompson, please state your occupation for the record," the judge's voice cut through my thoughts. "I'm a petroleum engineer, Your Honor. I work for ExxonMobil here in Houston." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Across the courtroom, Rebecca sat with her attorney, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany table. She wore that navy blue dress I'd bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. 5 years of marriage, and here we were, dissecting our life like vultures over roadkill. The humid Texas air seemed to seep through the courthouse walls, making everything feel heavy and oppressive. I loosened my tie and glanced at my lawyer, David Martinez, a seasoned divorce attorney who'd been practicing family law in Texas for over 20 years. His weathered face showed no emotion, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "And Mrs. Thompson," the judge continued, "your occupation?" Rebecca's voice was silk and poison. "I'm a real estate agent, Your Honor. I specialize in luxury properties in River Oaks and Memorial." She flashed that smile that had once made my heart race. Now it just made my stomach turn. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker. Other couples waiting for their turn whispered in the gallery, their stories of broken promises and shattered dreams creating a symphony of human misery. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everyone look tired and defeated. "Your Honor," Rebecca's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Victoria Hayes, stood up with theatrical flair. "My client has been more than reasonable in these proceedings. She's asking for nothing more than her fair share of the marital assets. She built her career while supporting Mr. Thompson through his demanding work schedule. She deserves half of everything they've accumulated together." I felt my jaw clench. Nothing more than her fair share? She was asking for half of everything. My house, my investments, my retirement funds, even my vintage Mustang that I'd restored with my own hands in the garage during those lonely weekends when she was showing properties to her other clients. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, her voice rising with confidence, "Mrs. Thompson has no hidden assets, no separate property claims. She's being completely transparent about her financial situation. She has nothing to claim beyond what any spouse would be entitled to in a Texas community property state." The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Nothing to claim. Rebecca nodded along, playing the part of the wronged wife perfectly. But I knew better. I'd seen the bank statements, the mysterious cash deposits, the expensive jewelry she claimed were gifts from clients. There was so much more to this story than she was letting on. David leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm, Jake. We've got this." But I wasn't feeling calm. I was feeling like a man watching his life's work being handed over to someone who'd betrayed him in ways the court couldn't even imagine. The Texas sun beat down on the courthouse steps outside, and I could almost feel the heat radiating through the windows. This was supposed to be straightforward, a no-fault divorce in a community property state. Split everything down the middle and move on. "Your Honor," David stood up slowly, his voice measured and deliberate. "While my client appreciates Mrs. Thompson's transparency, we believe there are some documents that need to be reviewed before any final determinations are made." Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. It was subtle, but I caught it. After 5 years of marriage, I could read her micro-expressions like a book. That tiny flicker of concern told me everything I needed to know. "What kind of documents, Mr. Martinez?" the judge asked, his patience wearing thin in the oppressive heat. "Documents that may significantly impact the division of assets in this case, Your Honor. Documents that Mrs. Thompson may have overlooked." The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Even the air conditioning seemed to quiet down. Rebecca's attorney shuffled through her papers, clearly caught off guard. This wasn't in their script. "I object, Your Honor." Victoria Hayes stood up quickly. "This is clearly a stall tactic. My client has been completely forthcoming about all assets and liabilities. If Mr. Martinez has evidence of something, he should have disclosed it during discovery." "Your Honor," David's voice remained steady, "this document came to our attention very recently. Let's say it's something that was hidden in plain sight." Rebecca's face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. The confidence she'd worn like armor was starting to crack. Her fingers stopped drumming against the table and instead gripped the edge so tightly her knuckles went white. "I'll allow it," the judge said finally. "But make it quick, Mr. Martinez. It's been a long day, and this Texas heat isn't helping anyone's patience." As David reached into his briefcase, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined my marriage ending. I dreamed of growing old with Rebecca, of watching Houston's skyline change from the porch of our house in Memorial. Instead, I was watching her squirm in a courtroom while my lawyer prepared to expose secrets that would change everything. The ceiling fan above us creaked rhythmically, stirring the heavy air but providing no real relief. Outside, a thunderstorm was building on the horizon. Typical Houston weather, where the humidity builds until the sky can't hold it anymore and everything breaks open. Just like my marriage. David's briefcase clicked open, and I saw Rebecca's eyes dart toward the sound. Whatever he was about to reveal, I had a feeling it was going to be worth every penny I'd paid him. The woman who'd claimed to have nothing to claim was about to learn that sometimes the most important documents are the ones you forget you signed. The manila folder in David's hands seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds as he pulled it from his briefcase. The courtroom had gone silent except for the rhythmic hum of the air conditioning struggling against the brutal Houston heat. I could see beads of sweat forming on Rebecca's forehead, cutting through her foundation like truth through lies. "Your Honor," David began, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years of courtroom experience, "I'd like to present evidence item A, a prenuptial agreement signed by both parties on March 15, 2019, exactly 1 month before their wedding." The words hit the courtroom like a lightning bolt. Rebecca's attorney shot up from her chair so fast it scraped against the floor. "Objection! Your Honor, we were never provided with any prenuptial agreement during discovery. This is highly irregular." But Rebecca had gone completely still. Her face was the color of ash, and her breathing had become shallow. I watched as the reality of what was happening sunk in, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than anger and betrayal. I felt sad. Sad for what we'd lost, sad for what we'd become. "Mr. Martinez," the judge's voice cut through the tension, "where did this document come from?" David cleared his throat. "Your Honor, this prenuptial agreement was stored in a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Houston. The box was registered under both parties' names, but Mrs. Thompson was the primary holder. My client only recently gained access to it when the bank contacted him about overdue fees." I remembered that day clearly. The bank had called me 3 weeks ago, asking about the safety deposit box I'd forgotten existed. Rebecca had insisted on getting it when we bought the house, claiming we needed a secure place for important documents. I'd signed the paperwork without thinking much about it. After all, what did we have to hide from each other? "Your Honor," Victoria Hayes was scrambling now, her composure cracking like paint in the Texas sun. "Even if such a document exists, the statute of limitations for challenging—" "Ms. Hayes," the judge interrupted, his patience clearly exhausted by the heat and the unexpected turn of events. "Let's see what this document says before we discuss challenging it." David handed the folder to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The room fell silent except for the sound of pages turning. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, thundering like the storm clouds gathering outside the courthouse windows. The judge's eyebrows rose as he read. Then he looked up at Rebecca, then back at the document, then at me. "Mr. Thompson, were you aware of the contents of this prenuptial agreement when you signed it?" "No, Your Honor." My voice came out rougher than I intended. I remember signing papers before our wedding, but Rebecca told me they were just standard protection documents. She said her father's lawyer had recommended them because she was inheriting some property from her grandmother. That was the truth. Rebecca had presented the papers to me during a whirlwind week of wedding preparations. Her father, a successful oil executive, had insisted on legal protections for his daughter. I'd been so focused on the wedding, so trusting of the woman I loved, that I'd barely glanced at the documents before signing them. "And Mrs. Thompson," the judge continued, his voice taking on a different tone, "you were aware of the full contents of this agreement?" Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor." The admission hung in the air like the humidity outside. I felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart, that had been broken months ago when I discovered her affairs. This was something deeper. The realization that our entire marriage had been built on a foundation of deception. Your Honor, David stood up again, I'd like to read the relevant sections of this prenuptial agreement for the record. The judge nodded, and David began to read in his clear, measured voice. Section 4.2. In the event of divorce, Mrs. Rebecca Thompson waives all rights to spousal support, alimony, or maintenance payments. Section 4.3. Mrs. Rebecca Thompson acknowledges that she enters this marriage with significant separate property, including but not limited to a portfolio of investment properties valued at approximately $2.3 million, inheritance funds totaling $850,000, and a beneficial interest in Thompson Family Trust established by her late grandmother. The courtroom erupted. Victoria Hayes was on her feet, objecting to everything she could think of. The gallery of waiting couples began murmuring. But all I could focus on was Rebecca's face. She looked like she was going to be sick. Furthermore, David continued, raising his voice above the commotion, Section 5.1 states, Mrs. Thompson agrees to disclose all separate property and income sources to Mr. Thompson within 30 days of marriage. Failure to do so constitutes a material breach of this agreement. The judge banged his gavel. Order! Order in my courtroom! As the noise died down, the full weight of what I was hearing began to sink in. Rebecca hadn't just hidden assets from me during our divorce proceedings. She'd hidden them from me during our entire marriage. The woman who'd claimed to have nothing to claim had been sitting on over $3 million in separate property. Your Honor, David's voice was steady, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath. My client was never informed of these assets. He believed his wife was a working real estate agent struggling to build her career. He supported her through what he thought were financial difficulties, never knowing she had access to millions of dollars in separate property. I thought about all those times Rebecca had claimed she was broke between real estate deals. The times I'd paid for her car repairs, her credit card bills, her shopping trips to the Galleria. The time she'd insisted we couldn't afford a vacation because her commissions were down. Mrs. Thompson, the judge's voice was sharp now, do you deny that you failed to disclose these assets to your husband? Rebecca's attorney was frantically whispering in her ear, but Rebecca just sat there, staring at the table. Finally, she looked up, and for the first time since we'd entered the courtroom, I saw the real woman behind the mask. No, Your Honor. I don't deny it. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would change everything. Outside, the storm had arrived, and rain was beginning to streak down the courthouse windows. The Texas sky had opened up, just like the truth about my marriage. Your Honor, David said, his voice now carrying the weight of victory, given that Mrs. Thompson has materially breached the prenuptial agreement by failing to disclose her separate property, and given that she has now admitted to this breach under oath, we respectfully request that the court enforce the agreement in its entirety. The implications were staggering. If the prenup was enforced, Rebecca would not only lose her claim to half of our marital assets, she'd also lose her right to alimony. The woman who'd walked into court expecting to leave with half of everything I'd worked for was about to leave with nothing at all. But as I watched her shoulders shake with silent sobs, I realized that winning this battle felt nothing like I'd expected. The victory was hollow, tainted by the knowledge that the woman I'd once loved had been lying to me for 5 years. The storm outside was getting worse, and I couldn't help but think that it was just beginning for both of us. The rain hammered against the courthouse windows like bullets, each drop exploding into smaller fragments that raced down the glass in chaotic patterns. The sound echoed through the now silent courtroom, where everyone sat processing the bombshell that had just detonated our proceedings. Judge Morrison removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture I'd learned meant he was buying time to think. After 30 years on the bench, he'd probably seen every kind of deception imaginable, but this case was clearly something special. Mrs. Thompson, he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, this court needs to understand the scope of your oversight. Mr. Martinez, please continue reading the relevant sections of this prenuptial agreement. David nodded and flipped through the pages, his experienced eyes scanning for the most damaging passages. I could see Rebecca's attorney, Victoria Hayes, frantically taking notes, probably trying to find some legal loophole to crawl through. But from where I sat, it looked like they were trapped in a room with no exits. Section 6.1, David continued, states, Mrs. Thompson acknowledges ownership of the following properties: a commercial building at 1247 Westheimer Road, 2 residential rental properties in the Heights District, and a 40% stake in Thompson Commercial Real Estate Holdings, LLC. My head spun. Westheimer Road. That was prime real estate in Houston. The Heights properties alone were probably worth $500,000 each, and I'd never heard of Thompson Commercial Real Estate Holdings. I'd been married to this woman for 5 years, shared a bed with her, planned a future with her, and she'd been hiding an entire business empire. Your Honor, Victoria Hayes finally found her voice, though it cracked slightly under the pressure. Even if these assets exist, the failure to disclose doesn't necessarily invalidate the entire agreement. We request time to review. Ms. Hayes, the judge interrupted, your client just admitted under oath to material breach of contract. In Texas, that's grounds for voiding the entire agreement or enforcing it as written. There's no middle ground here. The courtroom felt like it was spinning. I glanced at Rebecca, who was staring at her hands folded in her lap. Her carefully constructed facade had crumbled completely, revealing someone I didn't recognize. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd thought I knew, had been a fiction. Mr. Martinez, the judge continued, does your client wish to pursue enforcement of the prenuptial agreement as written? David looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't expected. Compassion. This wasn't just about winning a case anymore. This was about the complete destruction of everything I'd believed about my marriage, my wife, and my own judgment. Yes, Your Honor, I heard myself saying. We request full enforcement. Very well. Mrs. Thompson, you have 30 days to provide a complete accounting of all assets listed in this agreement. Additionally, this court is ordering a full forensic audit of your financial records for the past 5 years. If any additional undisclosed assets are discovered, you may face charges of perjury and fraud. Rebecca's head snapped up at the word, fraud. For the first time, real fear flickered across her face. This wasn't just about losing money anymore. This was about the possibility of criminal charges. Your Honor, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain, I'd like to request a brief recess to confer with my attorney. Granted. 15 minutes. As the judge left the bench, the courtroom erupted in a buzz of whispered conversations. I stood up on unsteady legs, my mind reeling from the revelations. David put a hand on my shoulder, but I barely felt it. Jake, he said quietly, I need you to prepare yourself for what's coming. The forensic audit is going to uncover everything. Every hidden account, every secret investment, every dollar she's kept from you. It's going to be ugly. I nodded, but I wasn't really listening. I was thinking about our 3rd anniversary, when Rebecca had cried about how tight money was. I'd canceled a weekend trip to San Antonio that I'd been planning for months, using the money instead to pay for her emergency dental work. Meanwhile, she'd been sitting on millions. There's something else, David continued, his voice even quieter. The address on Westheimer Road? I drove by it last week when I was preparing for today. It's not just a commercial building, it's a high-end restaurant. One that's been operating for over 3 years. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. All those nights Rebecca had claimed to be showing properties, all those weekend open houses she'd had to attend. She hadn't been selling real estate for other people, she'd been managing her own empire. She's been living a double life, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. That's what it looks like. And Jake, there's probably more. The forensic accountant is going to dig deep. We're going to find out everything. Across the courtroom, I could see Rebecca and Victoria Hayes in heated discussion. Rebecca's composure was completely gone now. She was crying openly, her mascara running in black streams down her cheeks. Victoria looked like she was trying to convince her client of something, but Rebecca kept shaking her head. The 15 minutes felt like an eternity. Outside, the storm was intensifying, and I could hear thunder rolling across the Houston skyline. It seemed fitting, the weather matching the chaos of my emotions. When the judge returned, Rebecca's eyes were red and swollen, but she looked determined. She stood up before anyone could speak. Your Honor, she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it all day, I'd like to make a statement. Judge Morrison looked surprised. Mrs. Thompson, I strongly advise you to consult with your attorney before. I've consulted with her, Your Honor. I want to tell the truth. Victoria Hayes looked like she was going to faint. Criminal defense attorneys probably had nightmares about clients who wanted to tell the truth in open court. "Very well," the judge said. "Please proceed." Rebecca took a deep breath and looked directly at me for the first time since the hearing began. "Jake, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. The truth is, I never needed your money. I never needed your support. I had everything I needed before we ever met." The courtroom was dead silent except for the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. "I inherited the business from my grandmother when I was 25. Thompson Commercial Real Estate Holdings owns 17 properties across Houston. The restaurant, the office buildings, the rental properties, they generate about $200,000 a year in profit. I've been managing it all while pretending to be a struggling real estate agent. I felt like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. This couldn't be real. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd supported through her career struggles, had been wealthier than I'd ever dreamed of being. Why? The word came out of my mouth before I could stop it. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears again. Because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I had. I wanted someone to choose me, not my money. But somewhere along the way, I got lost in the lie. I got so deep into pretending to be someone else that I forgot how to be myself. The honesty was brutal and beautiful and devastating all at once. I could see the real Rebecca now, maybe for the first time since we'd met. She was broken, lost, and terrified, but she was finally telling the truth. "Your Honor," she continued, "I waive all claims to marital property. I don't want half of Jake's assets. I don't want alimony. I just want to end this marriage and try to figure out how to live with what I've done." The judge stared at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Thompson, do you understand that you're giving up significant financial claims?" "Yes, Your Honor. I understand." "And you're making this decision freely, without coercion?" "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Morrison looked at both attorneys, then at me. "Mr. Thompson, do you accept your wife's waiver of claims?" I should have felt victorious. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt empty. "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well. This court accepts Mrs. Thompson's waiver of all claims to marital property. The prenuptial agreement will be enforced as written. We'll reconvene in 30 days for the final decree." As the gavel came down, I realized that winning had never felt so much like losing. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, but inside the courtroom, the real reckoning was just beginning. 2 weeks later, I stood in the empty living room of our house in Memorial, surrounded by boxes and the ghosts of 5 years of marriage. The Texas sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors Rebecca had insisted on installing during our second year together. I'd thought she was being extravagant with money we didn't have. Now I knew she could have bought 10 houses like this without blinking. The forensic audit had revealed even more than David had predicted. Rebecca's business empire was vast and sophisticated. 17 properties, 3 restaurants, a small hotel near the medical center, and investments in tech startups that were worth millions. She'd been living the life of a successful entrepreneur while playing the role of a struggling real estate agent with Oscar-worthy dedication. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother Mike. "Moving truck arrives at 3. You sure you want to do this alone?" I stared at the message for a long moment. The truth was, I wasn't sure about anything anymore. The past 2 weeks had been a blur of legal documents, financial disclosures, and sleepless nights trying to process the magnitude of Rebecca's deception. But somehow, facing the physical dissolution of our shared life felt like something I needed to do alone. "I'm good," I typed back. "Thanks, though." The house felt enormous without Rebecca's presence. She'd moved out the day after the hearing, leaving behind only the furniture and a handwritten note apologizing again for everything. I'd read it once and then thrown it away, but the words had burned themselves into my memory. "I know sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know that my feelings for you were real, even if everything else was a lie." I walked through the rooms, each one holding memories that felt tainted now. The kitchen where she'd cooked elaborate meals, claiming she was practicing for when we could afford to eat out more. The home office where she'd spent hours on work calls that I now realized were probably business meetings about her empire. The bedroom where she'd hold me close and whisper about our dreams for the future, never mentioning that she already had the financial means to make any dream come true. The doorbell rang, interrupting my dark thoughts. I opened it to find David Martinez standing on my front porch, looking uncomfortable in the afternoon heat. "Jake," he said, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to check on you and, well, there's something we need to discuss." I invited him in, and we sat in the living room among the boxes. David loosened his tie and leaned forward, his expression serious. "The forensic audit is complete," he said. "Rebecca's total net worth is approximately $8.7 million. But that's not why I'm here." I waited, sensing there was more. "Jake, she's been trying to contact you through my office. She wants to meet." "No." The word came out harsher than I intended. "I don't want to see her." "I understand, but she's not asking for a reconciliation. She wants to make things right. There's something she wants to give you." I laughed bitterly. "More money? Is that supposed to make me feel better about being lied to for 5 years?" David shook his head. "It's not about money, Jake. Look, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've seen every kind of divorce you can imagine. But I've never seen someone do what Rebecca did in that courtroom. She could have fought the prenup. She could have hired better lawyers, filed appeals, dragged this out for years. Instead, she told the truth and gave up everything. Because she got caught. Maybe. Or maybe because she realized that lying to you was destroying her as much as it was destroying you." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawn that Rebecca had maintained with obsessive care. Another lie. She'd claimed landscaping was her hobby, a way to relax from the stress of work. Now I wondered if she'd just been trying to create the illusion of normalcy. "What does she want to give me?" I asked finally. "Her grandmother's wedding ring. It's been in her family for 3 generations. She says it was the only thing that was ever truly hers, and she wants you to have it." I turned back to David, confused. "Why would I want her grandmother's ring?" "Because it's not about the ring, Jake. It's about what it represents. She's giving you the one thing that connected her to her real identity, before all the lies and deception. It's her way of saying that what she felt for you was real, even if everything else was fake." The afternoon sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, painting the living room in shades of gold and amber. I thought about the woman I'd married, the woman I'd thought I knew, and the woman who'd sat in that courtroom 2 weeks ago and finally told the truth. "Where does she want to meet?" I asked. An hour later, I found myself sitting in a small cafe in Montrose, a neighborhood that had gentrified rapidly over the past few years. Rebecca was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee growing cold in front of her. She looked different, smaller somehow, more fragile. Her usual perfect makeup was minimal, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked like a real person instead of a carefully constructed image. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. Her voice was quiet, uncertain. "David said you had something for me." She nodded and reached into her purse, pulling out a small velvet box. "This was my grandmother's. She gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for someone who would love me for who I really am." I stared at the box without taking it. "Rebecca, I can't." "Please," she interrupted. "Let me say this. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I destroyed everything good between us. But I want you to know that when I put this ring on your finger at our wedding, I meant every word I said. I loved you. I still love you." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on my anger and betrayal that I'd forgotten the woman I'd fallen in love with was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of lies and fear. "Then why?" I asked. "Why hide all of this from me?" Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "Because I was afraid. I'd been wealthy my whole life, and I'd never known if people liked me or for what I could give them. When I met you, you were so genuine, so real. You worked hard for everything you had, and you were proud of it. I wanted to be worthy of that pride. So you lied to me for 5 years. I told myself it was temporary. That I'd tell you the truth after we were married, after I was sure you loved me. But then months passed, and it became harder and harder to find the right moment. Every time I tried to bring it up, I'd see how happy you were with our simple life, and I'd convince myself that the truth would ruin everything." I could see tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them back. The worst part is, I started to believe my own lies. I convinced myself that I was protecting you, that I was being noble by not burdening you with my wealth. But really, I was protecting myself. I was too cowardly to risk losing you by telling the truth. The cafe was quiet except for the soft murmur of other conversations and the hiss of the espresso machine. Outside, Houston was settling into evening, the sky turning the deep purple that meant another hot day was ending. "I don't know how to forgive you," I said finally. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to take this ring and maybe, someday, remember that what we had was real. Even if everything else was a lie, what I felt for you was real." I looked at the velvet box, then at Rebecca. She looked broken, but also somehow more honest than I'd ever seen her. This wasn't the polished real estate agent or the mysterious business mogul. This was just a woman who'd made terrible choices and was trying to live with the consequences. "What will you do now?" I asked. "I don't know. Try to figure out who I really am, I guess. Maybe sell the businesses, start over somewhere else. I've been Rebecca Thompson, the businesswoman, for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be just Rebecca." I reached across the table and took the ring box. It was heavier than I'd expected, and older. The velvet was worn smooth by decades of handling. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for loving me, even when I didn't deserve it." As I stood to leave, Rebecca called my name. I turned back. "Jake. I hope you find someone who's brave enough to love you honestly from the beginning. You deserve that." I walked out of the cafe into the warm Houston evening, the ring box in my pocket and a strange sense of closure in my heart. The marriage was over, the lies had been exposed, and the legal battles were finished. But for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally start to heal. The woman I'd married had been a fiction, but the love I'd felt for her had been real. And maybe, in the end, that was enough to build a new life on. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Houston, I realized that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that feel like losses. I'd won everything in court, but I'd lost the illusion of the life I'd thought I was living. Now I had to figure out how to live with the truth, both hers and mine. The ring box sat on my passenger seat, a reminder that even in the deepest deception, some things remain true. Love, when it's real, survives even the worst betrayals. It might be wounded, it might be transformed, but it endures. And maybe, someday, that would be enough to start again.